Hello, everyone. Thank you for participating in our CyberWeek panel discussion, The Future of Compliance is Now. My name is Elisa St. Laurent. I'm the channel manager at Qmulos, and I'm very pleased to have with me today 3 industry experts that are sure to have a lively, informative discussion around issues customers are facing with compliance monitoring. With me, I have Matt Coose, CEO of Qmulos, Igor Volovich, who's our VP of Compliance Strategy at Qmulos, and Andy Stewart, who is the Senior National Security and Government Strategist for Cybersecurity at Cisco. Before we begin, how about we go around the room and tell us a little bit about yourselves? Matt, how about we start with you?
Great, thanks, Lisa. Great to be here. My name is Matt Coose. I'm founder and CEO of Qmulos. Been doing this for coming up on 10 years now. And a background, I was an executive at Homeland Security for a while, ran federal network security for what's now CISA. And before that, did some corporate time at General Electric and some startups. And way back when, was a Army copter pilot for a couple of years. So that's a quick overview of my background and what we're doing.
That's an impressive background, Matt. Igor, how about you?
I can't hold a candle to Matt. I never flew choppers for the Army, but I did fly them for search and rescue as a civilian. So we've got that in common. I've been in cyber for about 20 years, started my career in Seattle, working for Microsoft and a bunch of startups. Spent most of my time in large multinationals. Hung out my own shingle around 2007 and have been in consulting. Took a break from that for 2 years to become a CISO of Invensys and Schneider Electric Americas. Heavy emphasis on operational technology, OT, and energy generating activities, and anything from Hershey to nuclear reactors in China. So we had a pretty wide spectrum of activities. Exposed me to a lot of things on the merger and acquisition front. Got to look at a lot of smaller companies, bigger companies, and do a lot of integration work in that regard. And of course, then I went back to New York and DC. I've been here ever since. Joined Mach 37 as a mentor and have been through about 35 startups as a mentor and advisor. And I'm here as VP of Compliance Strategy. And Matt had brought me on about 2 weeks ago.
And we're happy to have you. Andy, how about you?
Thanks, Alyssa. It's awesome to be here with the Qmulos team, a great Cisco Security Alliance partner. And I've been at Cisco for the last 3 years, but prior to that, I served in the Navy for almost 30 years. And since we are talking about aviation, I did spend about 2,000 hours of my life on the aircraft behind my right shoulder there. But my final tour of duty was at Fleet Cyber Command, US 10th Fleet, as the Chief of Operations, responsible for the execution of all Navy cyber, SIGINT, and Navy space operations. And I tell you that because it's only relevant because on active duty, I live those challenges of mainstreaming compliance into cyber operations. And so now at Cisco, I get to help customers implement security with continuous compliance as part of their overall architecture and security strategy. And I get to work with the great Qmulos team doing that. So it's great to be here.
Thanks, Andy. Well, let's go ahead and kick it off. One of the main terms that comes to mind with compliance monitoring, I hear over and over, is challenging. What are some of the frustration pain points that you're hearing from customers, and how does the customer keep up with all these ongoing requirements? Whoever wants to begin. Andy, you want to start?
Sure. Well, right there, you listed off a lot of challenges in compliance frameworks that are, they're all hitting the C-suite or the leadership team, and there's a lot to navigate and there's a lot to do. And frankly, some CXOs only see that as a cost in terms of time, resources, and people. And nobody enjoys stopping operations or getting distracted from operations to have somebody come into your SOC and do a compliance audit. And, frankly, none of that sounds like any fun. I mean, so before we even get to the technical controls and before we even start technology, you have to realize that this is as much an organizational and people challenge for any agency or business. So I think when you start thinking about compliance in terms of mission outcomes and organizational results, like you would in any strategic approach to any agency mission, it begins to shape how you secure and operate and defend your enterprise with compliance in mind. And you want to do that as easily and as efficiently as possible. And I think efficiently is the key word, because it costs time and money, and it interrupts workflow to go into a SOC, and ask the operator to pull some data. It takes some time to pull logs and do some analysis. And oftentimes that information, there'll be a time to wait, and it's only as valid as the moment it was pulled down a week ago or 30 days ago. It doesn't really reflect the state of compliance or the state of security in your network in an operational fashion. And so I think that's one of the big challenges we have to address organizationally, is not thinking about this as a compliance tax on the organization, but how do we actually mainstream compliance into operations?
Yeah, that's huge. This is Matt from my perspective as well, Andy. Well said, and definitely a big challenge. I think to go along with that, the one thing I would mention is just getting away from the status quo. It's like been done this way for so long that I think CISOs and compliance staff just have trouble really getting away from that kind of paperwork drill, that manual collection, that static evidence type thing, and get moved to operations. Whether it's a training issue or they're not the team's not trained up on data analytics, or that real-time infrastructure is lacking, but kind of changing the mindset from status quo is okay, compliance has been done for 30 years this way, it's going to be hard to change. We got to kind of get people over that. And I've seen some executives that I've talked to struggle with that bit.
Yeah, I can definitely echo that. The idea of compliance kind of it drifted away from what it originally was meant to be, which was, here's a set of guidances and controls, and here's how you can create a secure state. And then somehow we diverged from secure to compliant and started to consider these as two separate things. And of course, compliance, you can be secure and compliant, you can be compliant and not secure. And we see compliant organizations get breached all the time. And now, of course, what happens after is the CISO holds up the compliance report and says, but look, we were secure. Well, they were not, right? Clearly, if the breach has happened, then they weren't. So the question of how do we get back to that origin point of what compliance was meant to be, which was to guide efforts, to create a compliant posture that was meant to be reflective of the risk posture of the organization, right? To give answers to things like vulnerabilities and operational gaps. And that just hasn't been happening. We've seen this huge drift and this huge push towards compliance kind of becoming its own domain. And then, of course, we created products around that. And then the cycle just kind of started to perpetuate itself. And so now we've got this entire industry that's been built around just compliance being done as sort of an extension of this paper exercise that began years ago, decades ago even. So how do we get back to that origin point? How do we reinvigorate what compliance was meant to be, which was, again, guidance, baseline, a set of frameworks that one can follow, but not its own thing? I think that's the question that's out there.
Thanks, Igor. And you recently wrote an interesting article where you addressed compliance as an objective, not the objective. So I feel like you're alluding a little bit to that. Is there any more you want to say about that article that you wrote?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think there's a kind of I'll give you the 5-second review of that article, and that is, hackers don't care about checkboxes. As much as we want to say, look, we were compliant, and we want to hold up those compliance report and say, this is a measure of our maturity as an organization, the bad guys don't care. Nobody reads those compliance reports before they break in. I mean, some of them might actually as part of their intelligence gathering to see who might be vulnerable. But ultimately, they're breaking in, they're finding their path in, and they don't really care about, oh, well, look, there's this sign that says this organization is compliant. I'm not gonna go in. They're getting in any way they like. And so the idea that we can use compliance as sort of its own goal, I think that's been deprecated by the events that we've observed. And so if we make compliance its own goal, its own objective, and if we set out with a slogan of we got to make our organization compliant, we're shortchanging ourselves on what we could actually be, which is a really secure organization. And I think making folks understand that compliance is a milestone along the way towards becoming actually secure, that's really the message I'd love to leave them with. You can get to compliance and declare victory, and a lot of folks do. And they hold up that compliance report and say, here we are, we've done it, mission accomplished. only to be told by nefarious interests, by bad actors, that that's not really the way they think the world works. And so understanding compliance as a path towards security, I think that's very important, not considering it to be the objective, and really saying, we're not going to declare victory and we get to that full speak of compliance, because it really is a full speak. We think we've climbed that mountain and we're there and we declare victory, but it's too early. We have to keep going, and in fact, consider compliance as just an included component of the security program.
Thank you. Now let's talk about priorities. How do customers leverage what they have to demonstrate compliance under the various mandates? In other words, how do they future-proof?
Yeah, that's a really good question. The one thing that comes to mind for me, and this could fall into the list of challenges as well, but I think there's there's so many mandates that come out constantly. So you've had FISMA for the federal space and other compliance frameworks for commercial, and then you have a breach happen somewhere, and then all of a sudden there's a new buzzword out, and everyone's got to do zero trust or supply chain or whatever the new framework or mantra is. Staying up with that is a challenge. And so prioritizing like which of those you're going to do, which of those, you want to address as an organization is difficult. And being able to do that, kind of centrally with a very flexible sort of infrastructure, I think is a pretty critical priority to handle that. Because otherwise CISOs are just kind of constantly trying to, knock down the latest and greatest, buzzword that they're, make sure they're in good standing. But
any other thoughts on that?
Well, we can't have a webinar without mentioning the executive order and zero trust these days. And so I'm glad Matt was the first one who did it. But I think it's important to, just to step back from it and say, that zero trust approach is really a philosophical approach. And what's really telling the agencies that they need to rationalize and consolidate their security requirements with that type of approach. And that certainly includes a lot of the compliance frameworks that we're talking about. And, I think with having that zero trust philosophy, it gets to the point we're making about bringing compliance into a day-to-day operations, So to Matt's point, to be sure, zero trust approach is critical, but it doesn't replace sound controls and implementations of those controls for users, devices, and workloads. And, the RMF, gives us the 6 steps that we know as the categorize, select, implement, assess, authorize, and monitor. And monitor is one of those keywords that I like, especially when you get to going through the full steps of the zero trust process. Is bringing that into life means that you're looking at how the controls have been implemented and being enforced and what needs to be adjusted. And when you look at the core zero trust logical components that are laid out in the 800-207 framework, industry compliance is a key component. So what's different, what's changed, and what's available now is way back in the day, we used to write those policies down in a book and then we wouldn't look at them. But modern software defined networking capabilities, we can abstract those policies and make those a living part of network operations. And we can now use a truly data-driven approach that uses machine data from logs, configuration settings and events, any kind of network transactions, and those can automatically be collected from network devices or security appliances and applications. So you can continuously monitor and verify that those controls, just like zero trust says you should, and just like the RMF says you should, but you're doing that in a continuous way, and you're providing the required levels of protection and security. I think to get at Igor's point, it's much broader than just compliance. And I think so. I think when you're doing that, that's when you're really living a zero trust lifestyle and bringing that, compliance into daily operations.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And to Matt's point, right, we have mandates coming out all the time, and they need to comply. The need to demonstrate compliance is always there, and being able to move and respond quickly, not just with the reporting, but also with sustaining our controls and making sure our controls are in that right compliant state. That's very important. So I think agility And adaptability is really the answer here. And so for that, you have to have visibility and you have to have it up to the minute. So if you, every time you get a new mandate, every time you get a new request, or let's say your supplier or your customer wants to know where you stand on security posture, you're going out there and having to pull the data again, reanalyze it, and then provide that report based on that specific requirement, it becomes impossible. And then what we do, instead of automating it, we throw a lot of people at it, or we try to do things like robotic process automation, which is basically just substituting computing cycles for human cycles without really changing the process or the workflow. And so the real answer here is understanding things from a time perspective. And when we think about the OODA loop, right, the observe, orient, decide, and act, the 4 letters that gave us the F-16 fighter and the F-A-18 fighters, understanding how to move inside our opponent's OODA loop, meaning how do we outmaneuver them, how do we outsmart them, and how do we get there ahead of them, and our opponents here being, of course, the bad guys. We need to know when a control has failed before they find out the hard way, right, when they actually penetrate and breach the environment. So we have to move quickly. We have to have that up to the minute visibility. We have to pull that data on an ongoing continuous basis. It can be on a quarterly basis. It can be on a monthly basis or a biweekly basis even. We have to have constant pulse of the state of these systems. Think of it as a health pulse, right? Just collecting that telemetry on an ongoing basis. And years ago, we started talking about security telemetry and pulling data together, having that kind of the nirvana single pane of glass that, you know, very few folks have really been able to implement, just given the scale of the problem. But the objective is there. And so thinking about security telemetry, we can extend that and say, well, compliance telemetry is a similar concept, except you don't have to have a second set of data, second set of skills, second set of technologies. It's the same data. Compliance is just a different lens for you to use to look at it. And so when you think about that, when you flip that idea around a little bit, and when you say, well, I don't have to go out and get the data, I already have it, it's a lot more powerful. It's just the way that we look at that data, the way we report that data. And then really anything you bring to us, any compliance mandate, any framework, anything, right? You know, any executive order that comes out tomorrow, if you have that data and you have a way to adapt to that new requirement quickly, then that time scale becomes your friend, not your enemy.
Yeah, I'll go on to mention that I agree with all that, both from Andy and Igor. I think the latest, at least for the Fed folks, like the latest OMB memo 2131, I think really gets to some of that in terms of like the foundational level of like data collection, logging, you know, being able to kind of get that information in one central place and then putting the right lens on it to answer whatever question comes out, you know, tomorrow. So that whole idea of future proofing to me is really powerful, because that's kind of one of the biggest challenges I think, you know, folks in cyber have is there's always new threats coming out. There's lots of controls to implement, lots of things to do continuously that you need to monitor. And depending on the threat, you know, different controls are going to be more important than others. But having that foundation to have all that, you know, data in one place, pop the appropriate lens on it dynamically, and really keep an eye on those different things, you know, at any given time is huge. So I think M2131 is definitely putting people, kind of moving people in the right direction and towards that foundational, you know, data-driven element. And then just a matter of, you know, popping the right views onto it and making sure you're doing what needs to be done.
Yeah, speaking of the OMB circular, the M3121, the timeline here is March 2022. And so folks are going to have to get their stuff in order pretty quickly. And the language of the EO actually says there'll be a progress check, a progress review done across federal agencies and their suppliers to figure out if they're compliant with, and this is a direct quote, with the future NIST standard. So the standard hasn't even been developed yet. It's still in draft form, but already the compliance is expected. So as things continue to emerge and solidify on that front, environments are really going to have to be able to just snap to it and respond. And if you're just figuring out how you're going to instrument your environment for compliance data, and you run it as a separate process, you're investing additional resources where you probably don't need to. And just the human cost itself, because you will be forced to throw bodies at the problem. Where else are you going to lose them, right? And where else?
You'll never catch up. Yeah, they'll never catch up. Yep. Yeah.
I think we're back at the other point I made early on, that this is about how you do this and do this as efficiently as possible. I think efficiently is a key word, because nobody's going to hire more people, and you don't have the budget for additional capabilities, other capabilities that Igor Igor talked about, you really need to bring this into operations so that your operations and your whole organizational workflows are designed to support all your needs. Again, it's about operating, securing, defending your enterprise with compliance in mind.
So Andy, that brings me into the next question, because I was going to ask about the concerns regarding compliance automation and staffing. So you're saying efficiency is key, because I know people are concerned about that with staffing.
Right. So I think what you really need to do is think about how you can leverage your existing, security investments and your capabilities that you already may have in your enterprise, and think about ways and means to turn that into data-driven operations. And oftentimes the data is there, but you haven't focused in on it, or you haven't brought it into workflow. One example that I'll bring up, just Matt mentioned supply chain. It's a really great example about the data already being there. It's whether you're looking at it or you're using it appropriately. Among the technical capabilities that Cisco has been putting into our products for over 10 years is the use of trustworthy technologies, such as secure boot or a trusted anchor module. So when you're addressing supply chain requirements, those are requirements, capabilities that are embedded in products that can be technically interrogated and verified against several of the new NIST 853 SCRM controls. So you can actually interrogate and validate that the network components and software are genuine and they're not altered. You can check for tamper detection. You can check for component authenticity and satisfy anti-counterfeit scanning controls that are in 853, in addition to implementing what would be non-technical controls. But my point is that with the technical controls now, you're taking advantage of a data-driven continuous monitoring capability for supply chain that Cisco has been implementing in our products for over a decade. So it's really about going after the data that might already be there in your enterprise and using that in a data-driven way.
I think that's a great point too. I've always advocated for smart telemetry, right? Not just pulling any kind of data, not just pulling dumb data off of anything you've got, but really taking a look across your entire environment as you prioritize where you will be collecting that data. Because look, our bandwidth is not infinite, and especially when we start going into hybrid environments and you have to transition that link, that becomes cost prohibitive a lot of times and just performance prohibitive. So you want to look for those smart data sources that are intelligent and also allow you to do enforcement when you detect something, and hopefully even do it within the device itself or the platform itself before you even have to respond with human cycles. And so when you look at that prioritization scale and see what's available, looking for a smart device like that is always my preference personally.
Yeah, Igor, I'd say probably some of that data can satisfy multiple frameworks. So I know in the work you guys do with Qmulos, you're, to our earlier point, you're trying to satisfy multiple compliance frameworks. And if you can do that with the right set of data, with the right lens, now we're back to being more efficient in real time.
Yeah, I think the word we're looking for is meta control, right? It's a control that can satisfy many things. And if you can find that, that's perfect, right? And a lot of platforms are not capable of that, but certainly Cisco has plenty of those. And you guys have been doing this for a very long time. And not just building technology solutions, but really understanding the capabilities that you got to bring to the enterprise to help them solve risk challenges. And that's really what we're talking about here. We're talking about risk intelligence. We're talking about mitigating risk, and not just focusing on sort of this top-down technology-driven approach, but really looking at the data and looking at the opportunities to collect data and really implement controls across the environment in the most efficient manner possible, with low overhead for management and great level of ROI, not just in terms of investment, but also ROI in terms of the data that the solutions provide.
Excellent, thank you. Well, it looks like we are starting to get to the end of the session. It's time to wrap up. So I want to thank you three so much for your input and your insight. My key takeaways from today is the executive order is here and it's time. Get ready, be prepared, be confident in the data that we rely on. Don't treat compliance monitoring as merely a check mark. Understand your environment. Also use the infrastructure and controls to tell the story. So with that, thank you all so much for your insight and your knowledge, and have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
Thank you.